Morning to our fellows who are currently logging on from the East Coast, West Coast, and internationally. Thank you for joining us for our March Fellow webinar. We are focusing on psychology. We called it the blame game, and we have some great guests today. Before I introduce them, Dr. Wilson, why don't you give us some announcements for the fellows?
Absolutely. Happy March and good morning, everyone. Just a few announcements. Well, first off, happy Obesity Care Week. That was this week, March 3rd through the 7th. So just a reminder about education and the importance of the work we do. Registration for our ASMBS annual meeting opens March 11th. So make sure you take advantage of the early bird registration prices. And again, if you have an opportunity, make arrangements so you can get to the meeting. It'll be again in National Harbor, Maryland or Washington, D.C., June 15th through the 19th. Also, our next Bariatric Happy Hour is March 27th. More to come on that. The ASMBS 2025 Research Grant Award applications are open, and deadline to apply is April 7th. And also at the annual meeting, the Be Safe Hands-On Skill Set exam is set for June. That'll be on Monday, June 16th. And so spots are limited. So go to the website and be sure to register and secure a spot for that great course as well. And that's all the announcements.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. So we're fortunate to have two fantastic psychologists and something we've not done before. We have a patient today who are going to be sharing their experiences treating obesity as a disease within our field. Dr. Kelli Friedman is the IH provider of the century. We're going to make it big for ASMBS. She won that award this year. She's been the lead psychologist at Duke University, working in the metabolic and weight loss surgery clinic. And she is joined with Kati Duncan, and Dr. Duncan is on the IH Executive Council for ASMBS. We have two powerhouse psychologists here who understand kind of the before, during, and after of bariatric surgery and treating obesity in the current climate. And then we are joined also by Adriana Serrano, who is a patient and an executive at L'Oreal, so has talked about stigma in multiple different ways and has been focused on trying to improve how we approach obesity as a disease as a human population. So really excited to have the three of them join us today. Dr. Friedman and Dr. Duncan, take it away.
Okay, I'm going to start sharing my screen and thumbs up if you can see my slide now. Awesome. Okay. Well, first, good early morning. This is surgeon time, not psychology time. So we got up nice and early for you and so appreciate the opportunity to speak about this topic that I don't think is talked about a lot in medical training or in healthcare training at all. I do better with a live audience, and I like to think I'm funny when I give my presentations, but I'm getting no feedback from you guys, so let's hope you survive this.
I'll laugh.
Okay, thanks. So,
I will smile as frequently as possible.
Do something. I need some live feedback. But we hope to make this a really informative and informal talk. We'll see how this goes because Kati, Adriana, and I are going to go back and forth in this conversation of talking about the implications of bias and weight stigma in metabolic and bariatric surgery, but more broadly in our culture and in our healthcare system and how this impacts individuals quite profoundly, both psychologically and also medically, believe it or not. Okay, so here we go. Let's see. So here's the objectives that we have. And I should also warn you that I'm probably the world's quickest talker. If I wasn't a psychologist, I probably would have been an auctioneer. So if Rakisha or Shaina, you can like slow me down if you think I'm going too fast. I just have so much to say and share with our learners. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is actually define weight stigma. We get that we are talking to a bunch of probably primarily medical providers that don't always talk about this aspect of obesity. We then want to review how stigma and bias can impact patients in general and impact their healthcare. And then we want to actually give you some nuggets, some actual take-home messages, not just talk about the research of this, but how do we discuss with patients in a respectful and patient-centered way so that we're creating this inclusive environment that hopefully will impact outcomes for our patients. So Katie, you're up.
All right, so I think it's important to really just define what weight stigma is, or else we don't have a foundation from what we're working on today. I love this definition from the Yukon Rudd Center. They've done an amazing amount of research, and you'll see in our recommendations later that they're a beautiful website for recommendations should you need them for your patients, for your staff. Weight stigma refers to the societal devaluation of people because of their body weight or size. At the root of weight stigma are prejudicial attitudes and inaccurate stereotypes that people with higher weight are lazy, lacking willpower, unmotivated to improve health, and personally to blame for their weight. These negative attitudes and stereotypes conflict with scientific evidence and our current understanding of obesity as a chronic disease. You can go ahead to the next slide.
Okay, there
Thank you. Yeah. What else is it? It promotes this idea that body size is a matter of personal choice. It leads to the assumptions about individuals' health based solely on their appearance. And it reinforces that the only thing that we can do is dieting that will lead to long-term success. It subjects our patients with obesity to constant pressure to lose weight from everybody around them. It causes individuals with obesity to feel that their bodies are flawed or morally inferior. And finally, it results in internalized weight stigma. That's the extent to which somebody adopts the negative societal stereotypes about weight, and then as a result, harshly judges themselves or others based on those beliefs. So it's this horrible, vicious cycle that we cause by externalizing weight stigma.
Okay, so let's talk about this. What is implicit bias? I do not think that any of us get up in the morning and we're getting dressed and we think, I am going to offend one of my patients today who is in a larger body. Let's do it. Absolutely not. What I think happens is more our implicit bias is what impacts them. So what is that? It's these automatic attitudes that we're not even aware of, and it affects understanding, actions, decision-making, how much we talk to our patients, how we talk to our patients. If we look them in the eye, there are so many different things that are out of our conscious control that really impact our patients. And so some characteristics of this implicit versus explicit bias is that it operates outside of what we're aware of. It's shaped by all these messages we have gotten from when we are literally in preschool, and it can persist, like it happens despite our conscious beliefs. I do believe that most of us in this field go into this because we want to help people, and we don't necessarily have explicit biases. However, I will say this about obesity. It is the last, or I believe, my opinion is it's the last socially acceptable form of discrimination. There are still, I believe there's still tons of discrimination for people that are different. However, we don't tend to explicitly have them. With obesity, as I will get into later in the talk, it absolutely can also be explicit by us and by society.
All right, so I want to pause here for a moment to talk about shame. The shame that develops in society, especially our patients, due to weight stigma, and even the shame about sometimes how this presentation and addressing our own biases can make us feel. And addressing these issues can sometimes bring up these feelings of shame. So the goal today is to dismantle the shame so that we can do better. If you're already ahead of this, I mean, if you're working in obesity, my hope is maybe that these are not huge problems for you, but you can help dismantle it for your team, your staff, your family, and your friends, because this is a group project. I think I love these quotes by Brene Brown. If you were to put shame in a petri dish, it needs 3 ingredients to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. And we're working today to undo that. If you put the same amount in the petri dish and douse it with empathy, it can't survive. And so part of the goal of this talk is to kind of wrap our arm around what we know about this shame and say, it's okay. Let's give our patients, our family, and our friends this empathy about what has happened in the past, and what messages they've received from weight stigma. Because shame corrodes that very part of us that believes we're capable of change. So it's essential, if we acknowledge and release the shame tied to past thoughts and behaviors, not just for our patients, but for ourselves, we can kind of move forward with this meaningful change. So with that in mind, I think Kelli's going to talk about how prevalent this is.
I think I prematurely.
Before we get into the next slide, I feel like we just covered 3 really important topics. And now that we've defined them medically, I want to jump in on what that actually feels like as a human being living through those things. And going back into the first one and talking about the stigma, I see that there's 42 of you in this room. So with that, indulge me with engaging with us in the chat. And if you've ever and this could be a yes or no answer in the chat. If you've ever fallen into the black hole of comparison, like yes or no in the chat. And it's going to take a lot of vulnerability to admit that, but I feel like all of us have done that at some point in our life. We've gone into that hole of like comparison, right? Yes, too much. Yes, exactly. I'm seeing the yes. Thank you all for that vulnerability of admitting it and putting that out there. It's not easy to do that. And the reason why I want to bring that up because we're also talking about things like shame and empathy and the stigma on it. A lot of times empathy for us and the way it feels from an experience, a person who's going through it, is someone has to wait until it actually happens to them for them to fully have empathy for me. And the conversation around empathy that I would like to change is we shouldn't wait until it happens to you for you to feel like, oh, this is serious. Oh, this actually hurts. Oh, this is a problem. And really falling into the character, into a story of like what stigma feels like. If you all can picture this. I do work for L'Oreal, and L'Oreal has an amazing building in New York. It's called Hudson Yards. And there is this executive lounge in Hudson Yards where you can be invited to have this executive lunch. Can you all picture it? Can you tell me in the chat that you can picture this? You can picture it. It's a beautiful view. It's one of the top floors. You can see the whole city. You can even see the Statue of Liberty. You can see New Jersey. Like you can see it. It's absolutely stunning view. And when I walked in and I sat in the chair sank. The chair wasn't built for me. That is what stigma feels like for a person. When you realize that you're walking this earth and it's not built for you. And it doesn't matter how qualified you are to be in that room. It doesn't matter how educated you are to be in that room. The world wasn't built for you and for your body and mind. It took a lot for me to sit through the first 10 minutes of that executive lunch and then eventually find a reason for me to leave that involved work so I can excuse myself from the table because the chair just kept sinking as I sat in there. That's what stigma feels like. And leading into what Kati just said about shame, shame is a silencer. Do you all think, and let me know in the chat, do you all think I spoke up? Let me know in the chat. No, I didn't say a word. I went back to my laptop, I went back to my office, and I continued to work. So I just wanted to bring to light what that feels like as a patient, as a person going through some of these definitions that were just defined. And if that has helped you to just imagine it, please let me know in the chat if that has helped. Thank you for letting me insert in there.
Oh my God, that was perfect. I so appreciate, we've got this academic piece that we're doing, and I think it sometimes can take the emotions out of it. And what a profound example. And I can only begin to imagine how that felt. And so thank you for being vulnerable enough to share that experience with us. I think that was really helpful. And interject at any time. Clearly this morning, Shaina and Rakisha have put together 3 talkers. So we are not going to be short on things to say.
Absolutely not. And I have to echo what Katie Lee said, that shame is a sinking feeling. Yes, it is an absolutely sinking feeling. And the fact that I was actually sinking in a chair while experiencing it is poetic in itself.
Okay, so now I feel like I get back to the dry stuff. Okay, here we go. So what is the prevalence of this? Like, is this actually an issue, or is this just for a few people? It's a thing. Most adults report experiencing this. And I actually, not to date myself, but in the 1990s, did my dissertation on this because we weren't talking about it much then. There wasn't the Rudd Foundation, which is this foundation that really looks at the experience of stigma against weight. And I found that it was so prevalent, especially for individuals seeking treatment for their weight, which is what we are all, right? Anyone that's doing metabolic surgery is working with people that are trying to get treatment for their weight. We know that it's higher in females, and this is really not a surprise given the societal pressures that we see for women more than men. Certainly there's like a fulcrum, like there's a point at which even for men it's there. But for women, when there's even this slight deviation in body weight, there can be some shame and self-hatred. And I think a lot of the women on this call probably can relate to wanting to lose weight, even if they have what is considered a healthy BMI. And it's prevalent across the lifespan. So this is something that I think is profoundly important to realize. Children as young as 3 have internalized weight bias. When I watch moms and dads interact with children, and some of them just are in larger bodies, that's just their genetic predisposition, and they watch their children's weight and what they eat so much more than parents whose children do not have a larger body. And it's interesting because I think that actually messes it up. It messes up when children know that they're full or they're hungry, like you've had enough. Well, how would a parent know that their child is full or their child had enough? Starts really young. There's lots of bullying in school about weight. And that's actually what got me into this area, was looking at studies that were showing that from the 50s through, it was probably the 90s when I got into this, the stigma of obesity in children actually worsened. So many other areas of discrimination, overtly at least, were going down. That was not the case. While our population was getting heavier, the stigma of obesity was exponentially getting worse based on scientific studies. And this goes across everything. It is an equal opportunity offender. Doesn't matter SES, sexual orientation, gender identity. This is across every demographic that we see. It's profound. So where is it most pervasive? Where are we seeing this mostly? Well, let me tell you, it's everywhere. And this next example is going to make me very, very sad to share, but I'm going to share it with you. So when I was in graduate school, my favorite thing to do on Thursday nights was to watch with my best friend the show Friends. I know, again, I'm dating myself. I'm just getting old. I have so many examples. So I'm assuming even if you are not my age, you know the TV show Friends, correct? Okay, I'm assuming at least 40 of you are nodding your head. or you can put it in the chat yet, but just nod your head. There was this horrible storyline about Monica. And it showed Monica, who was one of the main characters when she was younger, as a woman in a larger body. And every time they showed Monica when she was younger, it would be doing all the stereotypical stuff. She would always be eating very calorically dense food, and she wasn't having a boyfriend, and she was isolated and lonely. Wow, that wasn't that long ago. And that was okay, right? Like, that was okay. Other forms of discrimination by that time were not overt. Covert, absolutely. And so I think that when people watch that, they absolutely internalize that, and it affects them. And that's not just people that are in larger bodies, right? That's for everybody, including everyone on this call today, where they were like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I thought. That's exactly why I thought Monica was overweight, how she was eating and what she was doing, and she couldn't get a boyfriend or girlfriend or what have you. We also know that weight affects pay. We know that weight affects promotion. We know that weight affects college entrance acceptance rates. It is profound and acceptable because government and policies don't necessarily look at this as a protected class. Okay, so what about us? I mean, we are educated, we are very smart people. Certainly, we are above this. No, we are actually part of the problem. And levels of weight bias in healthcare providers is astounding. And it's not just physicians, it's dietitians, it's nurses. And there are these beliefs that we have about our patients in larger bodies that are completely not positive. All these things that Kati mentioned earlier are these assumptions that we have, and it's probably, again, for most of us, unconscious. But who cares if we have these beliefs? Like, no one can see my beliefs. So, what is mine is private. Why would we care? Kati?
All right. So here's the problem. It affects how we treat patients, and it affects outcomes. We know that studies support that there's less time in appointments. I think you might have to hit, yeah, there we go. Patients are examined less often by a ratio of 2 to 1. Physicians will engage in less patient-centered communication. Simple procedures are explained less often to them. They report lower respect for patients. And with each increase in a patient's BMI category, there's approximately 2-fold increase in the likelihood of perceiving stigma in primary care. So this is not a small problem.
Adriana, I was wondering if I could ask you a question. Have you noticed, as we talk about any of this from the patient perspective, any differences over time, or if you've ever experienced anything that we've just talked about?
Thank you for tagging me in, because I was about to tag myself in on the patient experience with this. I actually have one of my biggest issues is I have a really long relationship with diet culture. And what you're talking about, how this starts young, it started young. My mom had me on Slim Fast at the age of 8. Okay, so diet culture was ingrained in me. And with that being said, has anybody ever had any of those drinks? Let me know in the chat. They're not great. So my relationship with food was conditioned at a really young age. Obesity is within my family. My grandfather was a very tall, but also a very big man. My grandmother was obese. My mother's obese. Pretty much all my aunts. I grew up thinking that being larger was normal because it was within my family. But then when I went to school, I realized not everybody had that same perspective. So this is a really young age perspective coming through. So in my late 20s, I sank the deepest I've ever been into diet culture, which I think really messed up my body. And why I'm going to give you this long story to really connect it back to my doctor visits and how we've normalized this stigma is I was hosting a regional training for my people. I showed up with a cucumber for lunch. I hosted the lunch, and it was catered. Didn't have any of the food that I catered for everyone else, but I showed up with a cucumber. And one person out of the 20 who attended questioned it. One person and said, "You're really going to eat a cucumber for lunch?" All the other 19 people defended it. So it just sank in deeper that what I'm doing is okay, right? So with that being said, I was at my smallest, but I also started feeling really bad symptoms. My menstrual cycle became very irregular. I started having migraines. I started having a lot of fatigue. I started getting these really bad symptoms, and I kept expressing and kept bringing it up. The only thing my doctor kept complimenting me on was the weight loss, and wasn't really listening to all the other symptoms that I was having. So for me, I was like, okay, this must be normal being skinny. Like, you should just be tired all the time. You should just not be regular. So this is normal, right? I normalized it. Eventually, it got to the point where it wasn't normal. And within 1 year, I gained 150 pounds. And this was still within my practice of diet culture. I was still not eating right. I was still trying to work out. It got harder as I gained weight. And I explained all of this to my doctor, and my doctor actually put in my diagnosis without actually telling me that I was depressed. So, and I actually found this out by looking at my record myself, and it said depression. And so as I was going through these symptoms and they were getting worse and worse and worse, every person that I would speak to, they would just say, you just need to relax. You just need to take it easy. Like, you really should just, not be so hard on yourself. Everybody gains a little weight. Like, that was some of the commentary I was getting medically. And it wasn't till I left California, moved to Arizona, met a whole new doctor who sat down with me, asked me questions. And this was the first time I had someone actively listening to me, had me explain my timeline, what was going on. I was also very transparent with the eating disorder habits. At the time, I didn't know it was an eating disorder. I was just explaining it to her. And she ran a few tests and found out what was going on with me. And I had found out that I did have an autoimmune disease, and there was a lot of things going on with my hormones. Like, nothing was normal. And after all of that, and I started getting treated, I was starting to also confront my eating disorders and things like that. She brought that to my attention and things like that, is when I started getting better. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because this was the first doctor who has seen me and talked to me the same from when she's seen me at my highest weight to now at a lower weight. I didn't have that relationship with any other doctor. And this is why she can never leave me. Like, I'm going to say that right now. When a patient finds someone like that, she can never leave me. But it is such an impact on our mental health. Information I was getting medically was confirming my eating disorder. It was confirming my disease. It was confirming that all of these unhealthy habits I was doing was okay. Because look at your number is smaller. Look at, like, you, every time you come in, you're like another 20 pounds. And then until it went the opposite, and then it became a moral failure. And then it became, well, you're just depressed. You should probably, just relax a little bit more. Don't be so anxious about it. Eventually, you'll be able to lose weight again, things like that. And I think it's important in this conversation is to be an active listener. Don't assume what is going on with their body or what is going on with them. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up in this conversation is being conscious on how you compliment people. You could be complimenting their disease. You could be complimenting their addiction. And that's what doctors were doing to me. So I feel like it's important that if you are seeing a weight shift in someone, whether it's up or down, instead of going in, especially down, instead of going into like, congratulations, hey, how are you feeling? What's going on? Lead it with a question and find out more information, because I was being complimented for my eating disorder, and that mentally really screwed me up. So thank you for inviting me and Kelli into this conversation. I think this is probably one of the most important ones for me to have a conversation about.
And I think particularly relevant what you just said is for people that work within a metabolic and bariatric surgery practice, right? Because the expectation is that we will see people losing weight after surgery. And I consciously do not comment on looks. You look great. Or about, if they've lost weight, I don't say, gosh, you're off the curtain, like you're not losing enough. I say, how do you feel about the 80 pounds you've lost since then? And they're like, great. I'm like, well, then that's great.
That's all you need to know. That's perfect.
I know.
Yeah.
It's not about what we think, but it's hard, right? Because we're so trained in society to comment on looks. That I do my best. And Shaina, I know you want to say something. I think you want to say something. Jump on in.
I do. Well, and I'm not supposed to, but I'm going to, because I totally agree with you guys on this one. I do everything in my power not to comment on actually the weight loss. How are you feeling? How are your medical problems? What are your medications doing? Lots of questions. Any nausea, any vomiting, any pain. More often than not, the patient eventually by the end will like, can you tell me how my weight loss is going? And I'm like, you feel good. That's the important part. Therefore, the weight loss is perfect. And I try not to bring up the number and focus on the kind of the health benefit. I think that's so key.
I love that you said that, because I feel like, can we just take this out of medical conversation for a second? Can everybody in this chat just indulge us with like saying okay by taking it out of a medical conversation? This is also just how we should be, even in everyday interactions with our friends, with our family members. I'm Latina. I am first gen Mexican, and weight is the first thing your tia is going to talk about when you see her at that party that you haven't seen her in like years. They'll be like, "Oh, you've really put it on." Like, that is the first thing, right? And I feel like if we're gonna do this within the industry that you're going into, it also needs to be caught outside of those conversations too. I had a really dear friend who it was a colleague, and we became friends, and then she left the company that I was with, and she went to go work in another company, and we kind of lost touch. And then we reunited just some random airport, like, oh my gosh, you're here. And she looked a lot smaller. And I said something, and she let me know that she had cancer. That was embarrassing because I complimented her weight loss, even though she was battling for her life. So this is why it's so important, even just in our everyday life. Like, hey, how are you feeling? Like, if the thought comes up, like, oh my God, I'm noticing a shift. I'm so noticing a physical change in their body. It's gonna come up. We can't stop it. The thought comes up, the first thing shouldn't be compliment them. The first thing, like, really recondition yourself to say, let me ask a question. Let me check in on how they're feeling. Let me check in on how they're doing. And then compliment the hard work. If they explain to you that they are in a weight loss journey, that they are working hard towards this, if that's what they explain to you and they open up to you, then compliment the hard work too. Don't just compliment like, oh my God, great job, because you look great. It should be like, hey, like, great job with that discipline of, getting up every morning and like working out. Great job with, really being conscious of like the food choices you're making. Like, compliment the work, because getting compliments is like getting high. And addiction is one of the most human things. So once you start getting these compliments in this experience, what will you do to keep getting compliments? And that's what was happening to me when I brought a cucumber for lunch. You know? So I think that this is such an important conversation to have. And again, it's not just between a patient, I say client because that's my world, a patient-doctor relationship. It is everything. It's within all of our relationships. If we can change the way we have that conversation all the way around us, it will become more natural when you're having these conversations with your patients.
100. So now take this to your as well. We are just giving you lots of information today that you can use in many different aspects of your life, because this is truly important and very pervasive and very, we wear it on our sleeve, right? Other health conditions, I can't walk in and see if someone has hypertension. I don't know, but with weight, we can. Okay, and I think Katie, you're on mute. You're on mute. Katie,
I might want to go through some of these numbers pretty quickly because I feel like Adriana's input is more important than our studies. But I think it's just important to note, like I said, this is not a small problem. We've got 53% of women with obesity reporting inappropriate comments about their weight from healthcare. 79% of people with excess weight report eating more to cope with the weight discrimination, right? This is, it's what we're doing is making the problem worse. And half of healthcare professionals admit to having negative reactions to patients with obesity. And that's just, it is affecting the care that we give to the patients. Kelli, I think are you the next slide? Yeah.
Okay, so basically we're saying that it really actually is more like when we stigmatize or think that we're shaming someone, it does not help. It intensifies the problem, actually. We're going to start going through these slides pretty quickly so you all can ask questions, because again, they got 3 talkers together and we're good.
Wait, hold on that last one. I'm sorry. The last point there, findings suggest that stigma associated with weight is more harmful than being overweight. I think that is such a key point. We're recognizing that the impact of weight stigma can have as many physical outcomes as being overweight itself. And we'll see that in a later slide. Go ahead, Kelli. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
So it's both a social injustice and a public health issue. Is this me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't want to keep going. These are my slides from another talk, and so I feel like they're on mine, but I don't want to overtalk on you. All right. So insensitive language about weight, negative judgment due to their weight. This is what patients are hearing, but now weight loss advice. Hopefully not from this group of people, but we know the primary cares that you all will be talking to are giving these patients poor advice, negative assumptions that we talked about, and attributing all symptoms to weight without a proper history or examination. They tend to be dismissive of experiences and concerns, and a lot of nonverbal behaviors. So one of the talks I do for the medical school locally is about how we can do 3 things pretty easily that don't extend the time of the visit. Sit down, make eye contact, and if you can, a physical touch, either on a shoulder or, you know, wherever feels comfortable. Patients will feel like you're listening to them. Even if you're not, hopefully you are, but it does give the impression that you care, you're attentive, and you're listening to what they're saying.
I love that you said that, Katie. That last one is really important. And I would like to, from the experience of it, I travel a lot for work, and right now I can't actually get people to stop talking to me. And this is like, I used to have no problem getting on a plane and not one person would talk to me. Not one person. And now it's like I sit down and everybody wants to say good morning, hello. They want to have full-on conversations. And I'm literally putting my mask on my face in their mid-conversation. Like I just want to zone out and like rest, you know? But that has to do with the stigma on obesity. When I weighed 150 pounds more, people weren't interested in having a conversation with me. And um and it's seen in body language, it's seen with lack of eye contact, it's seen with just overall just almost like you don't exist.
Mm.
I was seen less at 150 pounds more. It's almost an oxymoron,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think it's so important that as a doctor, you're going in to have a conversation with a person who already feels not seen. So really that point that you made, Katie, and I'm glad that you called it out, is really important. To sit, don't stand over them, sit at eye level with them. Like make eye contact, have the active listening, because it's not even what we say, it's how we project it. And I will tell you, like, how many of us, and you can say yes or no in the chat or even nod for everybody's here, how many of us already knew that someone didn't like you and they didn't even have to say it? The cues are all there. We know. We know. We know. So, and when you have this mass in your body, people feel that all the time. It's felt all the time. My wardrobe and my style hasn't changed. I went to look for the same clothes in a smaller size. Like I've always had this style of dress. My makeup has always been like this. And somehow I'm getting a lot more complimented. And I'm also now, when I was 150 pounds more, that was expected of me to be acceptable in society, to make sure that I'm overdressed and over made up. And this is a real conversation, especially in the beauty industry, that we talk about a lot. And now it's like, oh, why are you so dressed up for? Like why are you overdoing it? This is how I've been the whole time. I haven't actually changed that part of me and my style. So those are things that are very important to this conversation. And I'm glad that you echoed it, Katie.
Shaina and Rakisha, I want to also be mindful of time. Do you want us to start? We're still okay. So basically, the impact of all of this that we've been talking about is it really affects mental and physical health, but it also affects follow-up visits. So if you think about one of the things that metabolic surgery programs are measured on, it's long-term follow-up. Well, how can we do anything to increase that? And I think part of it is realizing that there's an impact of weight stigma, especially when someone experiences weight recurrence. That is a huge impediment for our patients to come back to us because of the shame and what they expect that we are going to be disappointed. And I think part of this is the shift in thinking of obesity as a disease, and not everyone's going to respond the same to every intervention. So here's the thing about weight stigma. Of course, it has a psychological impact. Like we knew that. You're speaking to psychologists, but it also has a health impact. And it's similar to racism, right? We knew for a while that racism is going to have a physical effect on people, blood pressure. It's like this John Henryism effect that it really affects people negatively. Well, studies are now showing that it also is the same for weight stigma and weight discrimination. It has incredibly profound effects across the mental and physical health. So, okay, now I feel like we've painted this doom and gloom picture, but what can we do about it? We are here because we can change and we can improve the outcomes. And I'm going to stop talking about it as patients, Adriana, as you pointed out, to individuals in our lives, whether they're our patients, our family members, our children, which I think is really profound, or our friends. So one, I think we need to recognize that we have these beliefs. Like all individuals, we have implicit bias, okay? And some of us have explicit bias. I've been on talks with bariatric surgeons, not that there's anything wrong with them, and they have made comments to me that have literally horrified me that their patients might kind of in some way experience this. And it was overt. This was not implicit bias. This was explicit bias. That was spoken to me, not to a patient, but I'm sure the patient can pick up on that. So here's the thing. If you think that you don't have this, I encourage you all in your spare time as surgeons, which I know you must have a lot of, take this test. This is an implicit bias test that was made to see if you have the implicit bias. And they actually did this study. I took part in it back. It was done at TOS, which used to be the North American Association for the Study of Obesity. So we're all there, like invested in obesity treatment and care. And even us, the people that are dedicated to this field, that are at this national meeting, had implicit bias. It can't speak louder than that. And what can you do? Really what you're doing now, thank you for ASMBS and Shaina and Rakisha for having this talk, right? This is often seen as like soft science, and why would this be important? And so we are glad to participate in this. So we want you to improve communication, right? This is what we're talking about. Use for person first language. And I find this is even more important now that we have these open notes. I will have patients come to me, just like Adriana said, like, I didn't know I was depressed. The doctor put I was depressed. No, I didn't even realize this. Patients come to me and they're like, I didn't know I had obesity. But what they'll read in their note is a obese female. Well, that's their identity. It's a person with obesity. If you think about, and this is a thing from Kati, so I will give Kati credit. She said, if you wouldn't replace the word obese with cancer, don't do it. So you would never say, this is a cancer female. We would never. And so we want to take it away from the person to the disease. And here's the other thing. The words that we use to describe weight have incredibly negative connotations. And actually, psychologists study this. Why would we not? And we shut down people if we're using offensive terms. When we get offended, right, we get caught up in our own mind. So really try to stay away from terms that we know are offensive. And so using more neutral language, BMI, high BMI, stay away from morbidly obese. Like people still, I'll be in conferences and they'll say that, and internally I will cry a little because I know that that is something that people find so very offensive, whether we use it in verbal or written communication, or when communicating with other providers or trainees. Severe obesity, it's fine, right? It kind of talks about the class without making it morbid. There's a good paper, if you guys haven't read it, that is from 2018 that Stephanie Sogg and our colleagues wrote that talk about quote unquote bad words. And bad words include stuff like weight loss surgery. Like Shaina was saying, that takes it away. It makes it just about weight. I think bariatric and metabolic surgery has a PR problem because people do think it's just about weight because that's how it started. But it's changed so much. And if we as a field can try to start to use this different language, I think it's going to help us as a field and also help other individuals that might consider this if we called it something different. Like if it's surgery for diabetes, well, that sounds like we get a lot more people than if we're just calling it weight loss surgery.
I'm on mute. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly, but encourage these open conversations about stigma, right? I think it's important at this stage in the game, what we know about obesity and in some ways apologizing for how we treated patients in the past. This is called the blame game. We've put a lot of blame on patients, and we've said, 20 years ago, I remember doing this work and I cringe at some of the things that I remember us telling patients. And so when I'm with the patient and we're talking a little bit about past history of stigmatization, and you say to them, I just want to apologize on, behalf of healthcare. We got it wrong and we know more now and we're doing this differently now. And let me explain to you about the science of obesity. You will see tears. Make sure you have tissues because they feel so good that they recognize while they had a role in this, they were not the only role. And support your patients emotionally, recognize these emotional and psychological effects of weight stigma and refer as appropriate. Not everybody needs to see a psychologist for therapy because they have obesity, but the impact of stigma can sometimes create anxiety, depression that does need to be seen. Compassionate, non-judgmental care. I mean, I think you've heard this before. You don't want to have chairs that are too small. You want to have a welcome space. But also, I really encourage you to talk to your staff about this. By the time they see you, if you're the well-educated, really great person who can welcome your patient and hold their hand and really understand what's going on, they've already seen 3 people. And if those 3 people don't have your training on stigma, they're going to stigmatize your patient before they even get to you. And the possibility of them coming back to you is lower. And the possibility of them coming back after surgery, if they decide to have it, is even lower. Nobody wants to sit in a room where they feel like they're being judged, let alone taken back to the next room and weighed and judged again. And then you come in and you're great. That's fabulous. But it doesn't work unless your whole team really gets it. And this is you, Kelli.
I know. Okay, so ASMBS came out actually with a statement about some of the way that we as a field have been talking about patients' outcomes with surgery. So we often face these tough conversations about weight and how we frame it, like especially when there's been weight recurrence, really makes a difference to the patient. So one, I think we need to think about it as weight recurrence versus weight regain, recidivism, which is a terrible word. Isn't that used in like the criminal justice system, for dear God? And failure. So this makes it disease related. Like we don't come back, if we're going to use the cancer example again, Katie, we don't come back if someone has a recurrence of cancer and say, oh my God, you failed the treatment we gave you. What have you done? We're like, oh, shoot, that treatment didn't work. What else can we offer you? And I am a card-carrying member of someone who did this initially. I've been in the bariatric surgery field since 2004 when I was a fellow and 12 years old, as you can all imagine. And so thank you for laughing, Shaina. So the first person I ever saw who experienced weight recurrence after a gastric bypass done by Eric DiMaria at VCU, I was like, oh my, like, I've never seen, I mean, I didn't say this to the patient, but I was like, what are we going to do? Like, this is such an anomaly. And now fast forward, about a third of my practice is seeing patients who did not have either an intervention that worked for them or their disease process was so severe that it didn't get the effect that they wanted. So our language matters with that. And the other thing is we want to think of surgical non-response, right? When we see someone that did not have the expected outcome, it's not failure or inadequate weight loss. It's really a surgical non-responder. And just our little tweaks in language, I think, can make a big difference for our patients and in life.
I would like to speak to this from a patient perspective because my husband and I actually did this together. I had surgery in May and then he had surgery in July. And he started experience the reoccurrence and he didn't want to talk about it at first. He was sinking into the shame of, oh my God, this failed me or I failed me. And he didn't want to talk about it at first. And, you know, of course we see it, right? And so I sat down with him one day and I just checked in with him and I said, hey, what's going on? Like, how are you feeling? And he finally opened up about it and he he actually joined me at one of the talks that we did and even opened up about it in front of everyone as well, is that he didn't want to talk about it because there was a lot of shame with it. And he thought that somehow he failed in this process. And thankfully, he did open up to me because I said, you know what? That doesn't mean failure. This just means let's go get you an appointment. Let's revisit your options and let's talk about what's going on with you to figure out what your next steps are. And I think that is also a support system. And the reason why I'm highlighting that is that's a support system that most people don't have at home. Most people at home, a support system will poke on that, oh, well, you failed this. And a lot of people's support system are already judging them, saying that doing this is the easy way out. So can you imagine the shame of your family saying, oh, this is the easy way out and you failed? Like that is really hard to process for people. So if you are a haven for them when they come to you to really echo that this is not a failure, this is a revisit, and we got to change directions on how we treat you to support you better. So thank you for highlighting that because that is real.
Kelli, can you go back one to the resources? I do that because if you scan the QR code, it'll allow you to go right to those links. So that and they've got resources for your staff, for yourself. There's a great TED Talk by Ali Zentner that is great to show to patients, to family, to friends, to help them to understand why this is such a problem. So I just wanted to give that a moment so that they had those resources before we popped off.
Thank you, Katie. Excellent suggestion. Okay, so this obviously could have been a 3-hour seminar and I know you're all not multitasking and just paying complete attention to what we're saying. But okay, so here's the take-home messages. 1, language and subtle behaviors matter. I mean, if you took away anything from this, it's maybe Katie and Adriana's 3 points about sit down, eye contact, and touch. I mean, what powerful things. And they're free. And they don't require extra training. We know about this. Inclusive environment. And really addressing this bias that you probably have, because we all do. Even Katie and I and, Shaina, we all have it. But if we address it, it's going to improve the outcomes for everybody in our lives. We have so appreciated this. I think we have like 2 minutes for questions and answers for anybody that might have it. And our references are up here.
Dr. Wilson, do you have any comments or questions you want to add?
I mean, probably like 1,000. I don't even think we have time to get into it. But I mean, thank y'all so much for just highlighting these kinds of topics, as surgeons, and I can just think of so many ways I can improve my encounters with my patients. Sometimes I think I do a great job. Sometimes I feel like, yeah, maybe I could have said things differently. So there is so much here, and I appreciate y'all sharing your experiences, Adriana, and y'all's expertise with us.
This is a super impactful talk. So I measure the success of a talk based on how many screenshots I take. And the hard part is what I learned today is there's a bias there that I need to work on because there's no way to screenshot the conversation you all had together. And I really appreciated y'all sharing your vulnerability and your experiences and some really good tips and tricks, not only based on like the data, but then also like how we can practically improve.
Kelli, somebody said, can you go back to the contact slide? I'm sorry to interrupt you, Shaina.
Oh, no, thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
And then I would encourage everybody who's still listening to take the implicit association test. Harvard also has them for different areas. It is fascinating and eye-opening where you're making your own biases explicit, how powerful that can be to start to improve. I take it every 1 to 2 years myself in a couple different fields. I have a lot of bias towards women, interestingly, as a woman. That was the one that shocked me the most, which is why I keep taking it. And I feel like it's opened up the idea of implicit versus explicit to me. And I just can't stress enough, I think, talking about it and making it transparent can only improves the experience for ourselves, our patients, and everybody else. Thank you guys so very much.
Thank you. And the last thing I want to leave everyone with, and Kelli, you really talked about this in such a great way, is when it comes to bias, it's so deep that part of it is realizing that the people that you love conditioned this to you. So the confronting a bias is difficult. And so please allow some grace for yourself in the process. Like if you realize, oh my God, I just offended this person, don't like beat yourself up about it. Just take a minute and say, you know what I said, I didn't realize would have this impact. Can you please tell me more? And just sit with them and don't put this ownership on you, like where now you have to like recover this whole thing. No, like just sit with them and ask them more questions because for me, like we all talk about, we all have bias. I have bias. I mean, I even have bias still on myself on the subject that I'm so passionate about. Like we all have it. But a big part of my bias is having to confront that this came from my mother. That also then came from my grandmother, who I loved so much. So it's deeper than just confronting it for yourself. You have to confront it that it's generational. So give yourself some grace. It wasn't built overnight. It's not going to get solved overnight. So allow some grace. And the best thing you could ever do is just take a minute, take a breath when you realize it happened and just go, you know what? That was not my intention. I didn't realize that's what that meant for you. Can you please tell me more? And then move on from it. Move on from it with the patient. So thank you all for this time. Kelli and Kati, the work that you do, I am in debt to you because what you do changes lives. So thank you so much for everything that you put out there and the information that you provide.
So
I
powerful.
think we end there.
Okay.
Thank you guys so very much. Y'all have a wonderful day.
You too.